I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Today, Liberal leader and Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that he was going to reinvigorate Justin Trudeau's gun grab, seizing hundreds of thousands of firearms that were otherwise purchased legally by Canadian firearms owners across Canada. Gun owners and non-gun owners alike should be deeply concerned. To talk about it, I've brought in our friend of the Western Standard, president of the Canadian Shooting Sports, executive director of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, Tony Bernardo. Thank you for joining today, Tony.
Well, thank you, Derek. It's nice to be here.
Well, no, because we're always talking about bad news. We never have good things to talk about. It's always bad news. I don't like talking to you for that reason.
I understand that. And with a little bit of luck and the grace of God, we'll have a poly of government, and then we can talk about all the good things.
Well, we'll see. Liberals are leading right now, so we have to take it seriously when they say this stuff. So I guess we'll just start with the background here. Over the course of the Trudeau's 3 terms, he announced, we won't get into every part. There's just too many gun bans and restrictions to be able to get into in background here. But, banned the sale of handguns, which triggered the biggest run on handgun sales in Canadian history. I remember as soon as the announcement came through, I went down to, there was just lines up out the door at Cabela's. People were just buying literally everything they could get their hands on. But he, the Liberals really cracked down on the so-called military assault-style rifles, banning them, reclassifying them from non-restricted to prohibited and from restricted to prohibited. But they never actually really got around to collecting any of them, really, because, they figured out that as soon as they actually start going around stealing people's guns, people are going to lose them. I should be careful what I say, because I might lose my guns if the government starts collecting them. This right here is going to be used as Exhibit A against me. This is going to be hilarious, getting played back in court one day. But so today, Mark Carney said that a Mark Carney Liberal government will take responsible action to keep assault-style guns off our streets while respecting the long-standing traditions of hunting and sport shooting in Canada. To do that, they will reinvigorate the implementation of the recent gun buyback program for assault-style firearms. Tony, how many assault-style firearms are currently circulating among very dangerous Canadian civilians?
I honestly have no idea, nor does anybody else, because those firearms are never made apparent until they're actually used, and it's very, very rare that those types of firearms get used. I can tell you that the only assault-style firearms that I know of on the street are the ones that are in the hands of police officers, and I'm not really terribly worried about them. Crime gangs, it's very rare for those types of firearms to be used. They're almost exclusively handguns.
So he says he wants to reinvigorate the implementation of an efficient gun buyback program for assault-style firearms. So perhaps we can only speculate what he means by this. The Trudeau government's been trying for 8 of the 9 years they were in power to do this. They even made an announcement, I think last summer or last fall was the most recent one, where they banned a bunch of new ones as a part of the so-called, I love how they call it buyback, as if the government owned it. To buy it back, the government must have owned it at some point, and buying implies it's consensual, not forcible, which is stealing. But what could he possibly mean by this? Because the Liberals have been trying to implement their so-called buyback program for the last 8 of 9 years they've been in power, and they've not succeeded in really seizing a single firearm from legal Canadians, because they know it's going to be so damn difficult. What could he possibly mean by this?
Well, I think that they're going to force our CMP to do it. During the press conference, Carney specifically mentioned Canada Post and using the post office. And he specifically mentioned our CMP. But that leaves like huge gaping voids in this entire process. Now, for example, several provincial governments have said they're not going to dedicate a single dollar to the collection of firearms. Now, does that mean that the government of Canada has to have a contract with the Sûreté de Quebec or with the Ontario Provincial Police to go around and collect these, because in those two provinces, especially those two provinces, the RCMP are very rare. Like, they basically police the airports and not much else.
Yeah, they're not, like in the Western provinces, the RCMP
Right.
are the rural police force. We have our municipal police forces. So obviously the Calgary Police Service is not going to be used to go around door to door in Calgary. The RCMP is in rural Alberta, but does not have jurisdiction in the cities. But it is there. But it's been Alberta and Saskatchewan, who have taken control of their own chief firearms officers. They've not only said they won't dedicate any money, they've passed legislation making it illegal for federal officials to go and collect firearms. So even if the feds found a way around the Alberta and Saskatchewan firearms protection legislation, would they essentially take centrally controlled RCMP officers, deploy them, and go door to door across all of Canada? Because there's this Canada Post thing where we're all expected like lemmings to go and drop our guns off at Canada Post, because that's obviously a safe and secure place to leave your guns. But assuming, as I am, that the most firearms owners do not just take their guns and drop them off like good little liberals, does that just leave then door to door raids of homes?
I don't see how it could be anything else. And when you've got 2.4 million gun owners in Canada right now, you've got an awful lot of raids you're going to have to do. And of course, the second the first raid happens, everything else just simply vanishes off the planet. And, the Canada Post thing, Canada Post has made it very, very apparent that they do not have the ability to do this. They don't have the security to do this, and they don't have the will to do this. The RCMP police union said they don't want to do it. They don't want to be cast as the bad guy. I mean, even as recently as a day before yesterday, Durham Region Police put out an endorsement of Pierre Poilievre and clearly state in it that gun bans and buyback programs don't work. Nobody wants to play. I don't know how they're going to reinvigorate this in any way, aside from maybe just, I don't know, hiring private security people and somehow empowering them to go door to door. But I mean, this is a recipe for disaster. I mean, something will happen, and it's not going to be good.
One of the saving graces of the Trudeau government was that he was so stupid. He cared about the announcements. I am banning military assault style weapons, and we're going to have a buyback program. And Trudeau was satisfied with it's a common criticism of the Liberals from the left and right, was that the announcement was the objective, not announcing something to achieve something. That was a saving grace. They were too incompetent and too concerned with the political aesthetics of things to actually follow through and steal people's guns. They just wanted to announce they were stealing. If they could have found a way that was easy, they would have. But they ran into these very practical problems. There is no large-scale RCMP in Ontario and Quebec, and I think Newfoundland, and I'm not sure about the other Atlantic provinces, but big sections of Canada with no direct major RCMP. The Canada Post thing is not going to work. People aren't going to comply with it. The actual enforcement of this is nightmarish in proportions with an uncooperative gun owning community. Carney strikes me, if he is elected and has a term as prime minister here, he strikes me as someone who is unfortunately more intelligent than Justin Trudeau. His incompetence was damaging to the country in many ways, but in many ways it was our saving grace. He was too dumb to actually do what he wanted to do. Carney is not stupid, and he probably would want to actually follow through on this beyond just announcing it. Are you more concerned that Carney would actually succeed in stealing guns than Trudeau on that account?
I am to a degree, but bearing in mind, of course, he's still got 87% of his cabinet is recycled Trudeau ministers, and they're just as incompetent as they were last year. So I don't really see, I mean, Carney in and of himself is not going to be able to do the strategy and the logistics needed to make this thing happen. I really still, to this day, do not understand how they're going to make this work under any circumstances. We're not talking about, one or two guns. We're talking hundreds of thousands of them, and they're rifles. They're big. There's no place to put them. The police stations, they don't have room for them. What are they going to do? Hire secure warehouse facilities that have to be manned 24 hours a day in order to store these prohibited weapons? And I mean, the money simply isn't there to do this. And we're talking gigantic sums. It's beyond the scope of what most people think it is. It's not simply go ahead and collect 10 guns and put them in a room with a lock on it.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be in areas of population for, Calgary, Edmonton, of course, that they're going to have warehouse facilities, and they have to be secure 24 hours a day and manned.
Well, it'd be great. The government can steal your weapons, and they're too incompetent to protect them, so you can go steal them back. That'd be great. The government steals them in the morning, you go steal them back in the afternoon. I don't think it's stealing to take back what is already yours.
I like the way you think, Derek.
Not that I'm encouraging raids on government warehouses. I would not do that, for the record, officially. Yeah.
And I'm not laughing because of it either. That's it.
No, that was something else.
Right.
Well, let's go through some other parts in Carney's announcement today. Automatically revoke gun licenses for individuals convicted of violent offenses, particularly those convicted of intimate partner violence. I don't see it necessarily a huge problem there. I mean, it depends what we're talking violence. Like, is it super minor, like you and I had an argument and I shoved you in the shoulder and there was an assault for that? I'm not sure that should maybe count, but certainly major, aggravated assault and stuff, things like that, spousal violence. I mean, he's probably got a point there. And I think the Conservatives have had similar proposals in that.
They've been doing this for years, for decades. If you commit an assault, they take your guns. This is not new. And, within the original Firearms Act, the provisos were in there to do that.
Yeah, I just don't think it's necessarily automatic right now. It is often the case where the prosecution will say, this is a violent crime. We want their gun license suspended for 5 years, revoked for 5 years or something like that. That's pretty common already. I'm not sure it's automatic, though.
No, it's not automatic, because doing so might prevent police officers from perhaps laying a charge on for something that might be minor, i.e., you pushed me on the shoulder, and now all of a sudden you've lost all your firearms. They just don't lay the charge. That's how they deal with it now. And so I really don't see a lot of change in that. That's not the part that got me. The part was when Carney said that for some provisions, they're going to remove the innocent until proven guilty and go to a reverse onus where you have to prove your innocence.
Well, talk a bit more about that. Like, there's no way that would stand up for 30 seconds in a court constitutionally. That's the most basic part of our legal tradition, as long as we've had one, is that you're innocent until proven guilty. Is it because because the feds consider firearms themselves to be a privilege, not a right? The Liberals have used this language: firearms are a privilege, not a right, and therefore, because it's not a right, it doesn't stand up to the same burden of proof in a court?
Maybe, but I think that perhaps we would hope that we haven't descended far enough into a socialist society that the right to innocence, presumed innocence, would still maintain. I don't trust the Trudeau Liberals. I don't trust the Carney Liberals, and they're all the same thing, of course. But I don't trust what they've done with courtrooms either, because we've seen some terrible travesties of justice in courtrooms, and you don't have to look too far to see those, right?
let's well, actually, this flows from it. He says he wants to toughen oversight of firearms licensing and strengthen the enforcement of yellow and red flag requirements. Those are kind of two different pieces. Maybe let's talk about the second part first. Yellow and red flag requirements. You might face completely erroneous bullshit charges for something. I've previously been open to the idea of yellow or red flag laws, at least depending on the severity of the charge they're facing. You know, if you're facing a murder charge, okay, maybe it's unfair, but when you're facing charges, you already do have restrictions placed on your freedom, even though it's not proved in court. I'm sympathetic to the idea of it for serious charges. I'm sympathetic for in general before. I faced some bullshit thing myself that got laughed out of a court. But in the meantime, I had a flag on my license. It's taken off now because it's been completely defeated. But it was a very minor charge, and I couldn't legally go shoot at the range in the meantime. My gun, I still had my guns, but I couldn't take them to the range. My guns weren't seized. But that made me a bit more suspect of these kinds of laws. Where do you stand? Is there a place for some flag laws for maybe very serious crimes, where someone's still pending charges, has charges pending at trial, or do you think it's just too open to abuse at all?
Well, it is open to abuse when they start saying we need more and more and more of it. But we've had red and yellow flag laws for 30 years. This isn't new. If you commit an assault, expect to lose your firearms, even if it's temporary. That's not new. So when they say they're going to strengthen them, I don't know what else they can do except maybe go with just a basic allegation of wrongdoing. It warrants a no-knock raid, and your stuff is stolen from you, which you never get back easily. We've had lots of experience with people who've had firearms seized for one reason or another. And sometimes it takes years to get the property back, even if the person's acquitted.
All right, well, the last part I want to get into here is, he says he wants a legislative requirement for the RCMP to classify new firearms models entering the market instead of the gun industry. What implications would that have? Because the RCMP already has the right to classify guns however they like, however arbitrarily they like. Right. It's very arbitrary, obviously. If if the stock isn't wood and the gun is, like black and looks scary, they say, it's an assault rifle meant for war. So it's pretty arbitrary already. But what impact would this have, having the RCMP classify new firearms models entering new firearms entering the market rather than the industry?
Well, for the vast majority of firearms imported into Canada, the classification of the firearm is readily apparent. If it's a handgun, for example, that does not meet the specifications of a 12.6 prohibited handgun, then it's automatically restricted. If it's a long gun and it meets the criteria for a non-restricted firearm, that is also readally apparent.
Yeah, but they arbitrarily pick all the time. We could talk. What's funny is the SKS is the only gun in mass circulation in Canada that is issued to militaries for war, and that is the one that is not banned. Not that they should, but it's not banned for certain demographic political reasons that we both know, but we won't get into. Maybe it's a little spicy, but it's used by groups that might vote liberal, whereas other guns are used by groups that would never vote liberal. It's extremely you think of the Ruger Mini, that is very obviously should be a non-restricted long gun rifle,
and
very obviously.
For a long time.
Yeah, but it's just been arbitrarily declared to be prohibited now, whereas it was non-restricted. It wasn't even a restricted gun before. So there are clear reasons for the classification, but they arbitrarily override it all the time. So what would be the difference?
Well, I have no idea. Really, it's always a crackerjack surprise when you open the box. The firearms you're talking about right now, there's one called the Crypto, and it was just prohibited a couple of weeks ago. when the feds put in the descriptive of what is a so-called assault-style weapon, the company that makes the crypto, which is Canadian, specifically designed the gun so it did not meet any of the criteria. And the RCMP banned it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the goalposts are shifting all the time. They're totally arbitrary, despite the fact that there is a definition now in law. The RCMP still has the ability to ban anything they don't like. And they've been doing this a long time. This is not a new thing. They've been doing this a long time. And so I don't really see how that changes a lot. It certainly is another ugly facet to this whole thing, because I don't believe the police should ever be in the position of making laws. I think that's just contrary to how our society should run.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
there it is.
well, let's flip to the other side here. In the conservative platform, is there anything encouraging in the conservative platform on firearms, or is there anything bad in the conservative platform, maybe to begin with, on firearms that would continue to move in the liberal direction? And on the other side, have they made any commitments that meets with approval of you and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association?
Oh, absolutely. Mr. Polyev has been very thoughtful in the way he's approached this whole thing. He's vowed to put together a firearms advisory committee of actual experts rather than victims. It's always been a belief of ours that just because you've been run over doesn't mean you're an expert on cars.
Mhm.
So they're going to actually do this, and with the intent of streamlining the laws so that they're effective and not quite as onerous in terms of paperwork. He's also said he'll immediately repeal the bans that the Liberals have put in since 2020. And
All of them,
all of them, yeah,
including the ban on handgun sales?
that's what he says.
Yeah, I mean, that's gutsy. I mean, it's obviously excellent policy. It didn't get a single illegal handgun off the street from criminals, but
Yeah.
I think non-gun owning Canadians have, most, not all, but non-handgun owning Canadians, have a soft spot for the mythical Canadian hunter who's in the woods,
Sure.
Shooting a moose or something.
Sure.
It's a very Canadian thing to do. But then, you want to go target shooting. They're like, oh, that's a little odd. Well, how do you practice for shooting a moose? But then, you want to be into sport shooting with handguns and whatnot. And people say, well, only weirdos would want that. People who aren't in it just don't understand it. And, so it's tougher political ground to fight on handguns than for, a hunting rifle.
Yeah, indeed it is. But the fact remains that hundreds of thousands of Canadians lawfully enjoy this as a sport. And since their firearms are not the ones that are ever used in the commission of crimes, it really makes no sense to restrict people from enjoying the sport. It's a time-honored sport. It's been in the Olympics since the beginning, and it should remain so. The government says, they'll put in exemptions for things like Olympic shooting. Well, what they did was they put in exemptions not for Olympic shooting and the training for that. They put in exemptions for the type of handguns. Now, within the actual Olympics, the type of handgun that you can use is designated by whether or not it fits in a certain size box. That's it. But the government of Canada doesn't seem to see it that way. So they've come up with their own list of what is permissible and what is not. And then you have to go through more rigmarole to buy one of these 22 pistols than you would ever believe, and affidavits, all kinds of nonsense. We're dealing here with hundreds of thousands of people who lawfully recreate with handguns. This is totally uncalled for. And, you will hear occasionally that 85% of the guns that the police seize in the commission of crimes are smuggled in across the border. And people would say, well, yeah, but what about the other 15%? Well, what they don't tell you is that most of that 15% are firearms that are lost and stolen from the police and from the military.
Uh-huh.
They don't tell you that part. Almost never are they stolen from lawful citizens because we respect the laws and we lock our stuff up.
Indeed. All right. Well, Tony, where can people find you and find out more about the CSSA?
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. We've got a great website, all kinds of information there. www.CSSA-CILA.org.
I when we ran sponsorships for you, I always found that such a tongue twister. You got to get a better website, like a good website, but the URL. I'm telling you, I love your organization. Don't like your URL. You got to work on that one.
There you go.
All right, Tony, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us today.